Welcome to the latest installment of the Aras Innovator Demo Series. Today, we're going to see Aras Requirements Engineering, making requirements part of the digital thread. The demo series runs for 30 minutes and features all demo with no sales pitch. Each installment showcases a different capability of the Aras platform. During their webinar, everyone is on global mute. If you have any questions, please submit them in the questions panel within GoToWebinar, and we'll answer as many as possible in our Q&A session at the end. This demo is being recorded, and when the recording is available, you will receive an email with the link so you can share it with your colleagues or review it again for reference. We have on the line today Michael Fenning, Senior Product Manager here at Aras. Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Brenna, and good morning, everybody. Before I get started, I want to quickly set the scene, give you some short introduction to the topic, and then jump directly into the demo of our requirements engineering application, latest release 12R2. For the introduction, let me say one thing. What we see currently in the market and in the requirements engineering domain, usually most of it is done on the basis of documents and not so much of models. This creates a lot of problems, very hard reuse of these big containers of information, if you will, and no change for real, so to say, traceability, because we lack granularity when we have only documents containing a lot of information and not having the ability to trace to the really granular information that is captured in those documents. If we don't move away from this pure document-centric approach, we cannot create the thing that we have called the digital thread. And my view is that the digital thread must be based on a more model-based way, on more granular information than just using documents. By the way, this is the V model. Most of you know this. Depending on who you talk to, the loved or the hated V model, which usually contains more than just one artifact that is created. It's not just parts. It's also, of course, requirements, a functional breakdown when it comes to functional analysis, system breakdown, and test cases for verification and validation. And what I wanted to point out here is two things. One is the digital thread is actually not a thin line that connects A to B to C. It's actually more of a graph and not a real thread. And the second thing I want to point out is that requirements on the left side, they cannot just relate to the part level. They can relate to a functional breakdown and to the system breakdown as well. If you think about functional requirements, the name says it, it will be satisfied by a function. And it's very hard to just relate that functional requirement directly to a part. And this is also the reason we are introducing not just requirement engineering as an application, but also systems architecture is on the roadmap to help you with developing systems and products in the very early phase of product development. The question is, of course, where do we want to start if we want to introduce the digital thread and the systems architecture and model-based systems engineering and all these other nice buzzwords that are currently around? My suggestion is start at the beginning. And the beginning is requirements engineering. And this is what I'm about to show you today. What we see currently with many customer use cases is that you actually can say there's two major use cases, two major ones. One is you get a document from suppliers, from customers, from the outside world, and you want to move it to a model to manage the granular information, manage the singular requirement instead of the whole container of the document that is capturing all of this information, and want to manage it. And then later on, once you've done so, you have to hand it over to your supplier, to someone else, to marketing department, who cannot access your model information. In other words, you need to have the possibility to move from a document to a model and from a model back to the document. This is something we reflect in our requirements engineering application, which I'm about to show you. So this is Aras 12R2. What I want to point out is the two major item types that we have defined for the requirements engineering application. One is, of course, the requirement itself, and the other one is the so-called requirement document. This is, as I said, reflecting those two major use cases, moving from requirement document to the requirements model using the requirements, and moving back from that requirements model to the requirement document and publish it in form of a PDF, in form of an Excel, and then furthermore. So these are the two main item types. If we have a look at one particular requirement, I want to point out four things. The first thing is most of the data management capabilities of the requirement as well as for the requirement document is standard innovator functionality. So if you're familiar with innovator, it's working more or less completely the same way as it would work for part. You have lifecycle states, you have workflows that you can associate to it, versioning is supported, permissions can be set on each of the requirements and the requirement documents. So this is more or less completely standard. Of course, you also can claim it and unclaim it. What else is here? You see down here the metadata for each single requirement. What I want to point out is requirements engineering is not just about creating content for each of the requirements, it's also managing that data, and you can only manage data with the right set of metadata, of course. What you see here, of course, is numbers, title, also classification for the requirement itself. Most of the times you will find stakeholder as one class, so requirement that comes from the outside world, something that we would call an engineering or a system requirement that is then the answer of your engineering department to that particular stakeholder requirement. That's two out of many different ways to classify requirements. We also have, of course, the tier, which could be a system level requirement, a subsystem level requirement, a component, or it could be actually also in terms of a specification. Complexity, priority, and risk, also a couple of metadata that you need just to manage the requirement. The third thing I want to point out is down here, you see the relationships that you need to set up the requirements model. So when you talk about requirements model, it's not just the sole requirements and a structure of requirements, it's more than one kind of relationships, because requirements can relate to many, many different things, as you did see also in the graph that I was showing for the V model. One thing, of course, is you can attach a document to the requirement that is supporting the content of the requirement. Could be a specification coming from the outside, could be a thing that usually don't change much, something like a standard, a norm, so to say, that comes from the regulation side. What you also can relate to is parts, of course. And as I pointed out, that only makes sense if you really find an answer for the requirement on the parts level. That's mainly true in the real world for 10% of the requirements. Most of the requirements you cannot relate to that. And this is the reason we are about to introduce systems architecture, where we will have the possibility to model also on a functional and on a logical level, not just on the physical part level. You also have a relationship to the external links that comes actually more or less a customer input. Customers use that usually to attach any kind of HTTP link. Could be a wiki, an internal one, could be any external website to just support the requirement and attach more information that help users understand why a requirement was framed in a certain way. And then last but not least, the two outgoing and incoming links. This is what you need to define the requirement model itself. That means outgoing links means what other requirements are, so to say, derived from this requirement. So let that requirement one be a stakeholder requirement, and you will derive a couple of more internal engineering requirements. So getting more into the details of the requirement and of the goal setting for your development. So to say, the answer to the goal that was given to you by the customer and by the stakeholders. And the incoming link is the complete opposite. That means if this one would be a low granular requirement, what was actually his father? Where was it coming from? Was it coming from a high-level stakeholder or high-level business requirement? So this would be the two links that you use to set up that requirement model. The last thing I want to point out on the requirement here is the so-called requirement editor. It is based on our TechDoc framework, and you see here how you can modify and enter more content to each of the requirements. This demo data here is, I guess, not the best practice because it contains a lot of information. Most of the time you would say requirements should be atomic. That means not to divide it anymore. But in this case, we wanted to show you what is actually possible. You can attach graphics. You can also attach other important things like labels, lists, use subtitles, and also titles to structure the content a little bit further in the context of one requirement. That's the important part. Once you've saved that, if I click done, I also unclaim it here. That's the requirement editor. One additional thing, of course, you can also search in this content here to find the right set of information. So you can just search for a string here. That's helping you if the content gets a little bit longer, or if you want to find and replace a couple of information that is in here. That's the editor. If we then go to the requirement document, as I say, this is, for example, requirement document number 2. You would have more or less the same metadata and, of course, the same data management capabilities as I did show for the requirement item type. More or less completely the same, except you have more additional possibilities to describe it, to have a longer description, like a summary for the document, and a little bit less metadata to classify it. But essentially, the idea is completely the same here. Down here on the relationship tab, you also have kind of the same relationships used for the same things, except for the fact that is not going to a requirement from here. It's only between requirement documents. So if I attach a document to a requirement document, can also be a specification, but it's attached to the requirement document and has nothing to do with the actual requirement model. Same is true for parts and external links. And of course, outgoing and incoming links are setting up requirement documents that you want to bring into the same context, because usually it's not just one specification that you write in your development process. It's more or less, a couple of those coming from different suppliers that you need to collect and trace and version. And so you want to have that functionality as well, and not just on the very granular requirement level. The thing that is new to requirement document that the requirement does not have is the contents relationship tab here, which gives you the information what requirements are part of my requirement document. In other words, the requirement document is kind of a collector of requirements and brings together all of the details, all of the fine-grained requirements that I set up initially in the requirements model. You can structure them into chapters. You do that by classifying a particular requirement to be a structural one. That means it would be a chapter, like chapter 1 here, and then requirement is just the contents. That could be structured in more levels, not just, 3? It can go into 6, 7, 8, you name it, structural levels. That's up to you. Good practice is not to go too deep, right? But keep it in reasonable terms. That's about the requirement document. On top, what you see here is also the requirement document has an editor. And once you put in, you can do that directly from that context. You can pick the right requirement you already created in the requirements model and make it part of that content, of that specification here, or you can directly create the requirement in the context of the requirement document. That means you don't have to go back to the requirements model and reauthor anything there. You can just reuse the information that was already in there. So this is about a requirement document. Coming back to the 2 use cases that I was mentioning, moving from a requirement document to a requirement model is currently supported by a lab solution. I can come to that later on. And moving back from a requirement model to a requirement document would be defining the requirements in here, meaning in the requirement model, with all the granular information, making them part of the same requirement document, and then just hit the publish document button and generate a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet out of the requirement document. So for a specification. What you can have here, of course, is your own style sheets. So usually this is what you see here is very primitive. This is our demo style sheet. It's just white and black with a couple of things in there. No colors, no lines, no pages, nothing like that. Using the TechDoc framework, you can define your own style sheet and make it according to your standard templates in your enterprise. That can be done here. And also here, of course, you can search through the whole content. All right, so that's about the requirements, requirement documents, item types. On top of that, for requirements engineering, of course, we have graphics, and you can look for the graphics on their own. You can reuse them in the context of many different requirements and many different requirement documents. Of course, we want to reuse a lot of information in here and not create more graphics or copy graphics or hold them as a copy. That's also supported, of course. So that's about it as the overview for requirements engineering goes. Are there any questions? Brenna, I guess I have to give it back to you.
Thank you, Michael. Make sure to enter in any questions you have into the questions panel. Are there any restrictions on relating a requirement to any other item managed by Aras platform above and beyond parts or documents?
There are actually no restrictions to relate anything. Of course, in the out-of-the-box product, we only can relate to part and graphics. But using the custom configuring possibilities on our platform, you can relate it to whatever makes sense to you. Second thing is, of course, I was briefly talking about systems architecture. Systems architecture will allow not just to relate to the part level, but also to a function breakdown and to a system breakdown level. That is on the roadmap and will be released potentially in the summer this year.
Next question, where are the requirements coming from? Is it created in the Aras Innovator or integrated with some external system?
So usually the Aras answer is both is possible. Requirements engineering has been designed to be an authoring system. The thing, of course, is that in the requirements engineering domain, there is a lot of different tools out there doing different things. And you also have to work together closely with your suppliers and your OEMs. So you need some kind of import-export functionality. That refers to the labs project that I was talking about. We have a current labs project working on the so-called REC-IF requirements interchange format, import-export. That is already working with, let's say, not mature functionality around managing it. But what I can also show or state is that we made REC-IF import-export part of the roadmap. It will be available somewhere later this year. We have yet not scheduled it, but it's something that is definitely necessary. And in addition to that, if you have a legacy system that you cannot move away from, there is always a partner in our partner network that could help you build a connector for it or help you to migrate from it to our solution.
Another question is there a connector to doors?
Not as a standard one, as far as I know. I do know of a couple of community projects in that area. If that's interesting for you, contact our partner management and ask for a partner that has developed such a doors connector. From what I understand, there was some projects doing that, but it's definitely not a standard product you can subscribe from us.
Okay, we have another one. Could you import a set of requirements from a spreadsheet?
So one answer is, and this is the reason why I'm pushing the REC-IF standard so much, there is a Excel spreadsheet plugin for REC-IF. So in other words, you could export from an Excel file into REC-IF and then use that REC-IF file to import into Aras. REC-IF is just an XML schema, so it's not a big deal to do that. In terms of connecting Excel itself to Aras, I need to find that out. We have, of course, a Office connector, but I'm not sure if that is actually supported.
How do I tell if a requirement is not met for a project?
What you need to do to meet a requirement is test it, right? So you need to verify or validate a requirement. Currently, we are working also on a application called simulation management. So if that verification should be done virtually, meaning a simulation model of any kind, be it FEM, be it 1D, be it Simulink, whatever it is, then that application would help to automatically say these requirements were met or were not met. If it comes to physical testing, there are some customer projects in the verification validation space. This is not yet a standard product. So there is community solutions potentially existing for it, but not part of an out-of-the-box product.
We have a few more. So is PDF and Excel the only formats that is exported?
In the moment, yes. And I guess also HTML is also supported. But as I said, REC-IF will be also one of the formats that we are about to support once the standard functionality is available in potentially release 4 or release 5 of requirements engineering. Then also REC-IF is supported as an export format.
We have time for 2 more questions. So Michael, can Aras requirements include definition of parameters that can be evaluated or verified by, let's say, a simulation process?
Yes, and I expect that being a question from a partner who has already seen my vision demo. I already have concepts about that. We are currently working hard on that. We want to make parameters part of Aras Innovator, and not just for requirements engineering, but also for simulation management and for systems architecture and for a couple of other things. So requirements, units of measure, that concept is about to happen. I would say early summer to be released, but don't count on me. That's not publicly stated yet, but it's definitely necessary. And as you said, as the question was phrasing it, that's exactly the idea. We want to attach a requirement when it's a performance requirement. That's usually how you would classify it. A performance requirement gets a parameter of any type of any kind. Let it be mass. Mass should not be greater than 100 pounds. Then that would be a parameter, and that would be the parameter that we can test against. And testing against means simulation.
Okay, and our last question is there any sort of access permission model that governs who can see or edit specific requirements?
So the answer is the standard Aras Innovator functionality. You can set permissions on each of the requirements and also make it part of the classification. So control it by the classification of the requirement. By now, with the standard product, there's only a few identities that have permissions to them. So in other words, it's configurable, and it needs to be configured anyway, because usually you need to meet your specific needs in terms of permissions and access control.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today for questions, but for any we didn't answer, they will be addressed directly within the next few days. I'm going to leave you with our upcoming demo series topics. On March 26th, there will be a demonstration on workflows that work for you. And then on April 9th, there will be a demonstration on digital twin, how to build, manage, and enable a powerful user experience. You can register for these upcoming demos and view any past demos at aras.com/demo series. And we'd love for you to join the Aras community at community.aras.com. There, you'll find blogs, community projects, and forums, all with a lot of great information. Be sure to also connect with Aras on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, where we share the latest updates and news, product information, and more. Finally, don't miss our annual ACE conference this March in Boston. We'd love to see you there to answer your questions, get your feedback, and take the opportunity to network with the Aras community, the Aras team, our partners, and more. I'd like to extend an exclusive discount code to you. If you enter the code DEMO10 when registering, you'll receive 10% off. We thank you for joining us today and look forward to having you visit next time. We hope you have a great day.